Late autumn, I was 43 and recently separated, finishing out the lease in a mid-rise that had thinned out faster than anyone expected. A structural assessment had flagged non-urgent long-term issues, the kind of phrase that means inconvenience, paperwork, and eventual decisions. Most tenants didn't wait. By November, my fourth-floor corridor felt like a kept museum, clean, lit, and used. My unit, for C, sat at the end, where the hallway ventilation hummed steadily outside my door like a distant appliance that never shut off. Evenings were predictable: microwave dinner, a few emails, shower at 10:15, lights out by 11 o'clock. If you prefer realistic accounts like this, subscribe for more quiet, grounded horror. I didn't feel unsafe then. It just felt temporarily emptied, as if the building were holding its breath. Breaking the lease would have cost more than finishing it, and I'd grown stubborn about predictability. Management kept common areas lit and cleaned. The security system still functioned. The lobby camera feed played in a loop on the monitor by the mailboxes. I worked remotely, which meant the apartment wasn't a place I returned to. It was simply where my day happened. That made the quiet easier to accept. No footsteps, no doors, no muffled TV sounds through shared walls. I told myself vacancy would feel like this: fluorescent corridor lights that never switched off, air that never changed, and the faint sensation of being the only moving part. My lease ended December 31st, a clear finish line I could count toward. The first irregularity didn't arrive like a shock. One night, around 9:40 p.m., I heard the elevator stop on my floor. The soft mechanical chime carried down the corridor, then nothing. No footsteps. No door latch. No voice, no phone call, no shifting groceries. I waited for the usual follow-up sounds, and got only the ventilation hum. I assumed someone had hit the wrong button, or management was running a test. The next night it happened again, nearly the same time. The chime sounded identical, as if recorded. I remember noticing my own breathing, because it was the only thing changing in the air. Over the next week, the elevator stopped at 9:40 p.m. consistently, even on weekends. I started checking through the peephole, not out of fear but out of habit, like confirming the weather. The corridor was always empty, evenly lit, doors shut, no shadows moving along the baseboards. The building felt sealed, as if sound couldn't travel properly. In the mornings I'd leave a tied trash bag outside for C for my walk down to the chute. More than once, by evening, it was still there but shifted slightly, rotated a few inches, the knot facing a different direction. Not gone. Not torn. Just adjusted. I began noting timestamps in my phone, treating it like a harmless anomaly I could quantify. If you enjoy slow burn, realistic horror, leave a like. Across from me, B had a small dent near the base of the door, the kind that looks like it's been tapped repeatedly by something hard and familiar. One evening I decided to stop waiting passively. At 9:40, when the chime sounded, I opened my door immediately instead of watching from the peephole. The corridor was empty, bright, and still, yet 4B's door was slightly ajar. Not wide, not dramatic. Just enough to change the geometry of the hall and let a thin line of darkness spill into the fluorescent light. I was certain it had been fully closed earlier. I stood there longer than made sense, listening for movement that never came. A faint draft brushed past my ankles from that opening, cooler than the rest of the hallway. Something in my mind shifted, quietly and without proof. I wasn't alone on the fourth floor, even if I couldn't see anyone. The next night, I decided to document the pattern instead of reacting to it. At 9:38 p.m., I propped my door open a few inches and turned off the lights inside 4C. I stood back in the dim, letting the corridor light spill in. At 9:40 the elevator arrived with its soft chime, and this time there were footsteps, measured, deliberate, not hurried. They moved down the hall and stopped near my doorway, close enough that the sound changed, as if the person had turned slightly. A shadow crossed the narrow strip of light on my floor, not a full silhouette, just a brief interruption. The footsteps continued to 4B. I heard a soft metallic click, like a key turning with care. I stepped into the hallway as 4B's door closed. No one was visible. I listened for the elevator to depart and heard nothing. When I approached 4B, the handle was warm under my palm, but the door was locked. As I stepped back, my own apartment door shifted behind me, air pressure pulling it toward the frame, almost closing it, as if the building were correcting a mistake. My phone screen glowed in my hand, 9:42 p.m. I went back inside for C and locked the deadbolt, then slid a chair under the handle, not because I believed it would stop anyone determined, but because it gave my hands something practical to do. I slept in short stretches and woke to the building's faint plumbing vibration around 2 a.m., as if water were moving through pipes that served no one. In the morning, I emailed property management requesting confirmation of occupancy records for my floor, specifically 4B. Their reply came at 8:17 a.m. 4B remained vacant, no authorized entries, no master key activity logged. The message was polite, final, and useless. That night I kept my lights on and stopped placing trash in the hall. I also stopped standing near my door when the elevator chimed. The elevator continued stopping at 9:40 p.m., though I stopped checking. The sound became part of the building's rhythm, like a distant machine cycling on schedule. A few days later I noticed a faint scuff mark near my own doorframe, about shoulder height, gray against the off-white paint, as if something had brushed there repeatedly. It wasn't deep enough to be damage, just evidence of contact. When I looked across the corridor again, the dent on 4B's door aligned with my eye level when I stood still, as if someone regularly stood close enough to study the seam. I stopped tracking times and focused on finishing the lease. Routine became my way of not confirming what my instincts already had. I moved out on December 31st without incident. I handed over keys, signed the forms, and walked away from 4C as if I were leaving any ordinary place. I never confirmed who accessed 4B, or whether anyone did at all. What unsettled me wasn't the idea of a person hiding, it was the repetition, precise, timed, controlled like a process. Sometimes at 9:40 p.m., wherever I am, I still expect to hear that elevator chime, and for a fluorescent hallway to exist just outside my door, unchanged. If you know someone who appreciates grounded horror, share this with them, and subscribe for the next account. Early spring, I was 46 and hired to oversee the phased closure of a long-term care facility on the edge of town. Residents had been relocated gradually over 3 months. Most staff were reassigned to other sites. By the time I arrived, the building was functional but mostly empty. Lights operational, HVAC running, medication carts removed, bulletin boards stripped. My temporary office was in the west wing, 3rd floor, where the carpet still held the faint impression of wheelchairs. The central heating system cycled with a low mechanical exhale that carried through the ductwork, steady and impersonal. If you value realistic accounts like this, subscribe for more grounded horror. Nothing about the place felt dramatic. It felt administrative, unfinished. Corporate policy required one on-site supervisor until the sale finalized and keys were formally transferred. That was me. My responsibilities were practical: asset documentation, insurance inventory, and nightly security walkthroughs logged at 11:30 p.m. I slept in a converted nurse's room near reception, a narrow bed beneath a corkboard still pinned with outdated schedules. The structure suited me. Emptiness, in this context, felt procedural rather than eerie. My rubber soles against polished linoleum produced the only consistent rhythm after dark. I moved methodically, checking doors, noting thermostat settings, confirming that nothing had shifted since the afternoon. It felt like closing a ledger, not guarding a relic. The first irregularity appeared as a soft chime from the nurse call system. A patient call light illuminated for room 312, though that corridor had been vacant for weeks. I assumed wiring instability caused by partial shutdown. The panel reset easily, the indicator clearing as soon as I toggled the switch. 2 nights later, room 312 triggered again at nearly the same time. The chime was polite, intermittent, almost apologetic. I walked the hall, confirmed the door was locked, and returned to my desk. It felt like a loose wire somewhere behind the walls, nothing more substantial than that. Over the following week, the call light triggers began occurring at roughly the same time each night. The room number shifted, 312, then 309, then 305. Each one sat farther down the corridor, as if something were progressing methodically. Doors remained locked. I checked handles myself. There were no signs of forced entry, no displaced furniture, no drafts from broken seals. My logbook entries, once routine, started to resemble a pattern instead of random malfunction. Motion sensor lights activated in segments as I walked, brightening one portion of the hallway while the rest remained dim. Each trigger registered at 12:17 a.m., the hallway clock's red digits unwavering. If you prefer slow burn, realistic horror, you can leave a like. I told myself that patterns are easier to see than to disprove. One night I positioned myself mid-hall at 12:16 a.m., facing the row of sealed doors. The building felt suspended, as if the HVAC had paused between breaths. At exactly 12:17, the next room down, 302, lit up on the panel behind me. The faint electronic click preceded the soft chime. I didn't move immediately. Instead, I thought about the discharge records I'd been reviewing that afternoon. Residents had been relocated room by room, starting from the far end of the west wing and working backward. The sequence of triggers mirrored that order precisely. The pattern wasn't electrical in any random sense. It was chronological. Determined to test the system rather than speculate about it, I located the breaker panel labeled West Wing, Nurse Call, and disabled the circuit before midnight. The corridor went still, panel dark. I waited near room 301, the last occupied room before closure. At 12:17 a.m., despite the breaker being off, a faint flicker registered on the call light outside 301, weak but visible, like residual current. At the same moment, the overhead light inside 301 hummed to life independently. I unlocked the door and stepped in. The room was orderly, bed neatly made, curtains tied back, a single chair against the wall. The mattress held a shallow indentation in the center, subtle but defined, as though someone had recently been seated there. I stood still, listening. No footstep, no ventilation change. The indentation slowly settled while I watched, smoothing itself without sound. Behind me, the hallway motion light timed out and shut off, leaving the room lit only by the overhead fixture and a dim emergency strip near the floor. The air felt heavier, less circulated. I did not investigate further. I exited, locked the door, and restored power at the breaker panel without additional testing. I documented the event in the log as an electrical anomaly and attached it to incident report #47B. Corporate responded the next afternoon, attributing the flicker to residual current or delayed discharge in the system. The explanation was tidy, technically plausible. I did not argue. Instead, I began shortening my nightly walk-throughs, limiting them to essential checks. I kept the lobby lights fully on and positioned the reception desk lamp so its narrow circle of light reached the main doors. Sleep became lighter but remained functional. I told myself that closure projects create irregularities, old buildings adjusting to disuse. The final 3 rooms in the discharge sequence, 300 through 298, never triggered. The building's sale closed before the pattern reached them. I avoided walking that stretch of corridor in the final week, though there was no policy against it. The unlit portion beyond room 301 felt different, as if awaiting confirmation. My logbook entries grew shorter, less interpretive. I focused on inventory counts and signed forms. The pattern had progressed in order, patient and precise, then stopped unfinished. That incompletion unsettled me more than the flicker in 301. I left before the final shutdown, handing over keys and documentation without comment. I never confirmed what would have happened if the sequence had continued to the last room. What unsettles me now is not the malfunction but the order, deliberate, measured, almost administrative. It felt less like a haunting, and more like something accounting for absences. Even now, when a digital clock changes to 12:17 a.m., I sometimes hear that restrained electronic chime in memory. If this account stayed with you, share it with someone who appreciates grounded horror, and subscribe for the next one. Late summer, I was 41 and contracted to supervise environmental remediation in a suburban development that had been fully evacuated. Groundwater contamination had triggered a long-term investigation. Homeowners were relocated, compensation negotiated, properties left in suspended status. I occupied house number 18 on Briar Hollow Court to monitor soil data loggers and ensure equipment remained undisturbed. The streets were still maintained, lawns trimmed by city order, as if appearance might preserve value. Each evening at dusk, the sprinkler systems activated automatically, sweeping arcs of water across empty yards with mechanical consistency. If you prefer realistic accounts like this, subscribe for more grounded horror. Nothing about Briar Hollow felt abandoned. It felt paused. My responsibility was straightforward. Download soil sensor data weekly, check calibration, forward reports to the environmental firm. Remaining on-site reduced commute time and allowed me to keep an eye on the equipment. I had been informed, clearly, repeatedly, that all other properties were unoccupied. The first night, while reviewing readings near the front window, I heard a series of exterior clicks. At exactly 8 p.m., porch lights along the cul-de-sac illuminated in near unison. The sound carried lightly in the still air, a synchronized activation that seemed almost ceremonial. I assumed timers had been left programmed before evacuation. The regularity felt corporate, not personal. At 8:15 p.m. precisely, the porch lights switched off. The timing was exact down to the minute. The next evening, the same pattern repeated. On at 8 o'clock, off at 8:15. I told myself automated systems often run without utility dependency, perhaps battery-backed. On the third night, I noticed something subtler. The curtains in house number 22 across the street, which had hung straight in uniform, were slightly repositioned, drawn a few inches to one side. There was no breeze. The air inside those homes would have been stagnant, windows sealed. I logged it mentally as oversight from the relocation crew. Over the next week, the 8 p.m. illumination rotated among different houses. One evening it was number 22 and number 24. The next, number 16 and number 20. The order wasn't random. Curtains shifted incrementally, sometimes revealing slivers of darkened interiors, sometimes concealing them. Garbage bins began appearing at curbs on collection day, lids closed, but when I checked casually in daylight, they were empty. I verified municipal records and utility accounts. Official shut-off notices were dated July 14th. Water and electric services had been disconnected to every property except mine. Yet each night, as 8 o'clock approached, I heard the synchronized hum of distant transformers adjusting load, subtle but present. If you appreciate slow burn, realistic horror, you can leave a like. Patterns are easier to observe than to explain. While reviewing archive project documents, I found a developer brochure map from years earlier. It outlined the sequence used during model home showings. Lights activated in a specific rotation to guide prospective buyers through the cul-de-sac. Standing at my front window one evening, I realized the current light sequence mirrored that map exactly. House by house, in the same order. It wasn't simple automation. It was repetition of an old presentation pattern, as if occupancy were being simulated. The subdivision wasn't merely empty. It seemed to be rehearsing presence. At 7:59 p.m., there was always a pause in the air, a held stillness before the lights engaged. One evening I remained outside at 7:59 p.m., positioned near the driveway of house number 18, watching house number 22 across the street. The sky was dimming, the sprinklers silent. At exactly 8 o'clock, house number 22's porch light flared on. A second later, its front door opened inward. Interior lights cascaded room by room, entryway, living room, hallway, progressing deeper into the structure. I saw no figure, yet blinds shifted subtly as though someone passed behind them. For a moment, a silhouette interrupted the hallway light, indistinct, adult height, nothing more defined than a vertical obstruction. Behind me, my own porch light switched on with a muted click. I turned. My front door stood slightly open, though I had closed it firmly minutes earlier. I stepped inside, pulse steady but focused. The air felt recently disturbed. The thermostat display in the hallway glowed brighter than usual, set to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I had left it at 78. There was no sign of forced entry, no alarm notification, no displaced object. As I stood there, I heard a faint relay click from inside the breaker panel, as if a circuit had been engaged deliberately. I locked every door and disabled the interior light timers, though I had never activated them. That night I slept with the main breaker to the porch circuits switched off, eliminating any possibility of external control. The following evening at 8 p.m., the rotation continued across the street exactly as before. My house remained dark. I watched from the window, confirming that none of my exterior lights activated. At precisely 8 p.m., there was a single knock on my front door. Controlled. Measured. No urgency, no follow-up. I waited several minutes before approaching. When I opened the door, the street was empty, lit by the steady glow of other houses. The knock never repeated. Each evening thereafter, the rotation across the cul-de-sac continued without deviation. My data logs began to show minor electrical fluctuations at 19 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds, a subtle voltage spike that preceded the 8 p.m. activation. The readings were consistent, measurable, but within tolerances that wouldn't trigger concern in a standard report. I filed them anyway. No trespassing evidence was ever found on any property. No footprints, no tampered locks. Yet each night, just before the lights engaged, there was a faint buzz in the air, like a system preparing itself. I completed the contract and left Briar Hollow quietly. The final report cited normal variances and ongoing remediation progress. Sometimes I wonder whether the neighborhood required one occupied house to maintain its sequence. The lights felt less like decoration and more like coordination, patient, deliberate. I'm not certain whether my departure interrupted the pattern or completed it. When 8 p.m. arrives now, I sometimes imagine porch lights switching on in perfect unison, as if waiting for someone to confirm they're still being observed. If this account stayed with you, share it with someone who values grounded horror, and subscribe for the next one.